A lot of late-breaking NFL news has affected our Week 3 NFL DFS picks and NFL Survivor selections. Based on that latest news, we'll reveal 10 value plays on DraftKings and FanDuel and whether you should switch your Week 3 NFL Survivor pick. And it's all coming up next. Hello, everyone. I'm Eric Lee with the Fantasy Football Consultants with a weekend show about all the latest breaking news that's going to affect your NFL DFS and NFL Survivor selections for Week 3. If you appreciate this content, please smash the like button, share your opinions in the comment section, and if you haven't yet, hit that red subscriber button. Quick note on NFL Survivor I want to get out. Huge news that the number 1 overall draft pick, Bryce Young, will be out for this game. So it has some people thinking, hey, should I go with Seattle, who faces Carolina at home this week? My answer as a Seattle fan is no. Save Seattle for Week 7. That'll be the best Survivor pick for that week when they host Arizona. All right, I do want to tell you about what I am thinking for NFL Survivor Week 3, but I'll get to that in a minute. But first, I want to go over the top 10 value plays for DraftKings and FanDuel based on the latest news. If you haven't yet, you want to take a look at our NFL DFS weekly show that I did with Michael Wiley that went through all of our favorite plays for Week 3, but there's specific ones, actually 10 that we wanted to highlight that were value, meaning below $6,000 or below on DraftKings, $7,000 or below on FanDuel. And we've got one quarterback off the top 10 list, and it's Gardner Minshew. We mentioned this because we did talk about him in the DraftKings show. We thought Anthony Richardson would be out because he was in concussion protocol, and Anthony Richardson is in fact out. Gardner Minshew isn't much of a bargain on FanDuel, so we don't recommend him on that site, but definitely on DraftKings. Really like him given his price. He looked really good as a backup going against Houston last week. Granted, I expect Baltimore to have a stronger defense, but you really can't go wrong with this price at quarterback. All right, so let's move on to running backs. And there's a whole slew of them that have created great value. We covered Jerome Ford on our show on DraftKings. He's only $4,800, $5,600 on FanDuel. There was some news since we filmed our show. Kareem Hunt has been signed. Now, the coach says that Jerome Ford is still going to be the featured back, but Kareem Hunt will play. Now, do you trust the head coach when he talks to the media? Do you know how you can tell when a head coach talking to the media is lying? His lips are moving. So I don't know. I don't know how much Hunt will cut in the Ford right away. Normally, a new running back wouldn't because he's got to learn the playbook. But remember, Kareem Hunt was on Cleveland last year, same coaching staff. So I don't think it will take him long to get up to speed. The other concern here is the Tennessee defense, especially against the run, is very strong. So little cause for concern, but he is a definitely cheap value play. And he looks so good replacing Nick Chubb on Monday night, both on the ground and in the air. The other option is Joshua Kelly. Speaking of that Tennessee defense, last week, Kelly went against that Tennessee defense in his first game with Austin Eckler being completely out. It didn't go great, but he gets a much better spot here going against Minnesota, which should be a complete shootout game with two great offenses and two below-average defenses. And Austin Eckler has been ruled out. So at $5,600 on DraftKings and really cheap, only $6,100 on FanDuel, Joshua Kelly is a definite option. How about Zach Moss at $5,500? Slightly less than Kelly on DraftKings and $6,400 on FanDuel. So a little more attractive on DraftKings for Zach Moss. Everything is coming up roses for Moss in this particular game. First of all, you may recall Jonathan Taylor is on the IR, so he is still out. You might say, what about Deion Jackson? Well, they outright cut Deion Jackson earlier today. So this backfield is all Zach Moss. Now, they did sign Trey Sermon, but he's got to learn the offense. I doubt that he's going to have any effect on Zach Moss's workload. He does face go against Baltimore, which is a good defense, but you just like the fact that he's going to be a bell cow here at these prices. All right, speaking of bell cow, maybe I should say this for the last week. Alexander Mattison should be a bell cow at 5,800 and 6,300 on FanDuel. So really attractive on FanDuel. As a season-long Madison owner, I am concerned because since we last filmed, they signed disgruntled running back who was in the doghouse from the LA Rams, Cam Akers. However, I don't expect Cam Akers to have any effect in this game. So from an NFL DFS perspective, if you like Madison, if you're like me and you just love this game and you want to get exposure to this Charger-Minnesota game, ridiculously high implied total and over under, go right ahead. Finally, number 6, Raheem Mostert. Now, we liked him at the beginning of the week at 6,000 and 6,600. Why? He's going to be a bell cow, home favorite, good implied total against Denver. Jeff Wilson is still on IR. The only real new news here is Jalen Waddle is going to be out. So that's a major offensive weapon. So perhaps they will rely a little bit more on Mostert than they otherwise would with Waddle in the lineup, either by running the ball or him getting some more dump off passes. So let's switch to wide receivers. There's a bunch of them here. On that same team, the wide receiver that should get a little bit more playing time due to Jalen Waddle being out is Braxton Berrios. I am not very comfortable with this particular play because I am not confident that he's necessarily going to get the workload. They did move from the practice squad to the active roster, Chosen Anderson. If you guys aren't familiar with that name, you know him. You just know him as Robbie Anderson. So it's just that his price is so low, it's hard to ignore. So at 3,600 on DraftKings and only 5,100 on FanDuel, if you're trying to construct a lineup and you're like, oh, I really need more salary to do what I really want to do, Berrios is someone you should at least consider far more now than you would have before with Waddle out. All right, Amari Cooper. This is someone that we liked from the very beginning, especially on FanDuel at 6,200. He was listed as questionable, and now he is completely off the injury list. So that's good news. He faces a Tennessee team that I talked about before that is very good against the run, but has been horrible against the pass. So you would figure Cleveland would throw the ball. One extra note, well, we'll leave it at that, actually. Moving on, the 9th person is Christian Kirk. Christian Kirk came alive last week with a big game. You know what else happened in that big game? You know who didn't play because he got hurt? Zay Jones. And guess who's out? Zay Jones. So he faces a Houston team that is riddled with injuries in their secondary. The one player that is playing is Jimmy Ward, and I would expect them to put Jimmy Ward, their best safety, to pull his attention toward Calvin Ridley. So Christian Kirk could be having a very big game, and it's at a really value price on DraftKings at 5,400. A little more expensive on FanDuel, but still 6,500 is playable. And then finally, how about Zay Flowers? Zay Flowers, 5,400. Again, super cheap on DraftKings. I think we had him in our original lineup. If for any reason you're not comfortable with him, easy shift over to Christian Kirk. But the one thing that has changed with Zay Flowers is one of his competitions for targets, Odell Beckham Jr., has been ruled out in this game. Now they still have Mark Andrews and they still have Bateman, but I still say the guy who has the most talent among this receiving corps, based on the eye test, is Zay Flowers. All right, let's talk about NFL Survivor. All right, so there are a couple of teams that we think you should consider. So it really comes down to Jacksonville, Dallas, or Kansas City. So we want to take a look at some of the late breaking news in analyzing that. Let's start with the Jacksonville Jaguar game against Houston. Just want to put a graphic that should scare you to death if you're thinking about playing Jacksonville, which I certainly was and still am. Their last 4 of the last 5 games that Jacksonville has played Houston has been the team that has won, even though Jacksonville won the most recent. Now, here's the deal. Obviously, when you're going back to 2020, this is a very different Jacksonville team and a very different Houston team. So let's go through some of the late breaking news affecting this game. Some negatives on the Jacksonville side. The public seems to be very scared of this game. Jacksonville, just 4 or 5 days ago, was 9.5 in most betting places a favorite. They have dropped in some places as low to 7.5 point favorites. Other places are 8. There's some that are 8.5, and there's still a few that's still holding on at 9.5. But it's definitely overall gone down. One of the reasons is that Zay Jones is out. He's a major weapon, but they do have other weapons. I mean, they still have Calvin Ridley, they still have Christian Kirk, and they still have Evan Ingram as a tight end. Almost more concerning is that Josh Allen has been limited in practice. According to the head coach, and remember what I said about head coaches when they talk to the media, that although he's questionable, if he doesn't have a setback, they're hoping that he is going to play. You're just going to have to wait and look at the inactives to see if he is playing. The good news is Jacksonville plays in the early games. What about Houston? Houston injuries concerns just continue to pile up. We'll start with the good news for Houston. Safety Jimmy Ward was a full participant in practice, and he will be playing. Now, that's huge, especially when you talk about some of the, how great Calvin Ridley has been. So getting Jimmy Ward back is big. What also would have been big is if Laramie Tunsil, their big all-pro left tackle, the guy that was going to protect C.J. Stroud's back's blind side. Unfortunately for Houston, he is out. He did not make the flight, so he is not going to be playing in this game. And the overall offensive line for Houston continues to be a mess. They just have a ton of starters that they projected for this season to be, they're still on the IR and will be out. I mean, credit C.J. Stroud. He somehow threw for like 348 yards last week, a lot of that in garbage time against the Colts, but he was running for his life for most of the time, and I would expect that's going to be the case again here against Jacksonville. And then a new injury, as if things couldn't get worse for Houston injury-wise, is their cornerback, Derek Stingley. This is, I believe, their first-round draft pick from last year. He is going to be out, and look at the other defensive starters. So 4 defensive starters for Houston, Perryman, Petrie, and Thomas, along with Stingley, will be out. So I am going to tell you, given all this news, what I said on the show was, if you have to make several picks, then at the end, you got to double up in picks. I would recommend going ahead with Jacksonville. Make no mistake, it's a gamble. Do I think it's more likely that Dallas and Kansas City will win this week more than Jacksonville will win this week? Absolutely. But I think it's a calculated gamble to save those teams because they have higher future value down the road when you're going to need to double up on picks. It is not as clear when you only have to pick one game each week. So that was the question in my mind. Do I want to switch from Jacksonville to another team? And if I did, it wouldn't be Dallas. It would be this next game, Kansas City. Kansas City has more future value than Jacksonville, but they don't. It's more like they have a lot of different games where it's okay. But there's only a couple of weeks where like, wow, I really need them. And let's face it, their best game all year is right here against Chicago at home. Still believe Chicago is one of the worst teams in the NFL. They were the worst team in the NFL last year. They have not played well so far this year. And if you look at the injury report, not a lot of news. And that's good news if you're rooting for Kansas City, because you think if both teams are healthy, this is going to be a rough game for Chicago. Isaiah Pacheco, I do think, is an important ingredient. He's their starting running back, but it appears he is more likely than not to play, even though he's still listed as questionable. You're going to have to look at the inactives on Sunday to know for sure. So spent a lot of time looking at the future value, and no question about it, Kansas City has more future value than Jacksonville, but I don't think it's worth the calculated risk. So what I am going to do, even though my head tells me you got to go Houston, this is a team that is one of the worst in the league, and they're facing that they have so many injuries. This is a great time to pick against Houston. Whereas later in the season, for example, when Jacksonville plays at Houston, it won't be as good because I expect a lot of these guys on the offensive line will be back and playing. So I get that. But although my head tells me, even when picking one game a week all year for Survivor, my head is telling me to go Jacksonville. My heart is to take the safer route, Kansas City, and that is what I am going to do. Interesting to note, when I look at the polls across the nation, and again, some of these really large polls where I absolutely think that Jacksonville is the pick with the highest popularity is Jacksonville, just slightly nudging over Kansas City. So it's interesting that going Kansas City is slightly the less popular pick. But so for our FFC poll, I will be going Kansas City. Go with what you have my permission to go with whatever your gut tells you. And my gut is saying to take it safe this particular week. All right, everybody. Have a great rest of your weekend. Take care, and we'll see you next time. Here are 2 videos we think you'll enjoy.